Do you know what the latest science says about how you can grow as an athlete and enjoy your sport more? Well, the aim of this podcast is to dive into the science, take out some aspect of it, look at it, and then apply it in a real world way to you in the hope that you can do just that. Get more out of your sport. I'll be having these conversations every week with my fellow coach, Scott Finley, who is also a PhD student, so understands that scientific background, but also works in the real world with real athletes just like you. And so we will try and apply the scientific knowledge to you in your real world environment in the hope that it's helpful. So we hope that you enjoy the conversation that you're about to listen to and that it helps you get the most out of your sport.
Hello and welcome back to the Elevate Multisport Academy podcast. Back here with Joel. I'm Scott. Joel, how are you doing this morning?
I'm really well, Scott. Thank you. How are you?
Good. Yes, not too bad. Looking forward to having another good chat with you. Today we are looking at another paper. We're looking at self-compassion again. So maybe 2 or 3 episodes ago we talked about self-compassion. Title of this paper is Associations of Self-Compassion with Shame, Guilt, and Training Motivation After Sport-Specific Daily Stress, a smartphone study. Just kick us off as normal with some quick fire questions for Joel.
Yes.
Is all stress bad?
Is all stress bad? No.
Nice. I had to look back and check if we'd done that one before, actually, because it sounded familiar, but I don't think we had. Number 2, will everyone react to stress in the same way?
No.
And more specifically on that, bit of a deeper dive, do you think the experiences of team sports athletes will differ from endurance athletes?
They may do, depending on the individual, Scott.
Good. And I've got a wee follow-up question about that later on, so we can dig into that a little bit.
Grand.
So I mentioned in the title, they talk about sport-specific daily stress. So I thought it'd be worth just defining that as they do in the paper. So sport-specific daily stress refers to stress that is triggered by situations that are unique or intrinsic to the sport context and are common in a competitive sports setting. So examples of that include making simple mistakes in a training session, performing below one's expectations, and receiving negative feedback. So we'll dive into that a little bit more in a bit. Just a quick bit about the actual study. There was 96 athletes, average age of 22 years, mean weekly training hours of 12, so fairly well-trained athletes. Yep. Across 26 sports. And interestingly, 40% of them being team sports, which I thought was an interesting point. So some of the stuff may not be as relevant towards, specific endurance sports, or there might be findings that are interesting across all sport. Basically, they completed questionnaires to measure self-compassion, but they also wanted to find out about occasions of 3 different types of daily sport stress. So the first one was when others, such as teammates, friends, coaches, pointed out things to me that I should be able to achieve according to my own standards. Number 2, I made a mistake that I should not make at my level. And number 3, I performed below my expectations. Okay. So, as I said, we talked about self-compassion a few weeks ago. This uses the same definition as the previous time we talked about self-compassion. So it's about the presence of self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness, and the absence of self-judgment, isolation, and over-identification. We're happy with that?
We're very happy with that. And rather than going into it anymore here, I think it's a good excuse to reference the previous podcast. Now, this is podcast 8, and I should have looked up which one it was, but I think it was maybe 2 ago. Go on.
Number 5, so you're close.
There we go. See, I like the fact that we just we do prepare, but also we want to keep this kind of easy-ozy. So I hadn't done that bit of research, but you had, which is good. Teamwork makes the dream work. There we go. Podcast 5 for more in-depth description of self-kindness. or self-compassion.
Yeah, because it's actually the way that this has worked out is this is a bit more of a broad view of self-compassion, whereas number 5 is quite a deep dive into the individual aspects, so that it might make sense to listen to this before going back, because then it's the other way around. But certainly different aspects of it.
Yep.
So they looked at the effects of self-conscious emotions, namely shame and guilt. They described these as a form of internal feedback that a specific goal, expectation, or standard has not been achieved. So one option we've discussed before is obviously setting realistic goals. But maybe where do you think the line is between a goal, expectation, or standard? For example, maybe you've lost some fitness, so you set the realistic goal of just finishing a race or having fun, but that doesn't necessarily stop you subconsciously expecting more of yourself. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think that that's really tricky, because what you've described, I think, is a really common experience, and it's why I think our goal setting process needs to be it needs to be very tangible. It needs to be purposeful. We need to be really embedded in it, because if we don't do that, then it's quite, if we just set like a soft goal. If we set a soft goal and we don't really define it, we don't really work it through like pen and paper, or we don't discuss it with a coach or a mentor, and it's not really defined, then what tends to happen is then our sort of those subconscious expectations that you spoke about just kind of ride roughshod over this soft goal that we didn't really define. And often those expectations can then make us feel bad, because they not only tend to be a bit more lofty, but they also tend to shift. So often our expectation before is different to our expectation afterwards. And so for me and athletes I've worked with, the foil for that is to really drill down into that goal. Like, let's get deep into what does success look like for this. And this can be like a season-long kind of conversation. Is what does success look like this season? What can it look like for this particular race? But I would really urge people to think about, what does that look like for this training session? What does it look like for this day? And have very clearly defined goals or visions of what success looks like. And then afterwards, often the expectation thing starts to like trigger off in our mind and goes, oh, he didn't do this or whatever. And you have to very consciously, in a kind of clunky way, go back to that goal and go, no, I'm gonna not listen to you, because that's what I defined. And I think that process, at least for me, that process is one that does feel, it feels clunky. It feels you have to kind of like plod through it. But if you do that, then you end up overriding those kind of broken expectations, and you can kind of sit a little bit more happily with, what you've achieved, and you can measure what you've done against that goal and that vision that you had. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It's I think the soft goal thing is quite an important point, because it's quite often the other way as well, where you set a too lofty goal, but again, it's a soft goal because you've not taken the time to consider, actually my fitness level is actually here. I'm setting the goal of finishing up here, but actually my fitness is here. So let's set a more realistic goal by diving deeper into the goal setting process. So no, I like that.
You made a really good point as well about the expectations being lofty. And I think in competitive people, so if we're involved in sport, we probably have some element of being competitive, probably some element of self-improvement and growth in our mindset. And so quite often those expectations can not only like play a role like afterwards, when they start to corrupt the achievement, but they can also play a role beforehand, where they go, oh, like you said, oh, I did this before, so I'll probably do that again. So I think the other take-home point is that when we define success, when we define the goal or the vision, what that looks like, we should make it very specific. We should write it down and discuss it, but we should also do it based on data. So for me right now, I'd love to be able to go out and run a 16-minute flat park run, but the data suggests that I cannot run any faster than 17 flat at the moment. So if I go to my park run next week and I go, I'm going to run 16:30, even if I write that down and define it really well, it's not realistic. So we need to
Yeah.
be quite data driven in how we select those goals. And then, as I say, go back to those. So we're sort of quietening the emotional expectation component.
Yeah. And I was going to move us on actually, but I'm just, as soon as you brought us back to the expectations there, I want to just quickly touch on the standards as well, because if you think about team sports, there's so many moving parts that can go into whether maybe a junior team beats a senior team because of this, all the contributing factors. I would say there are less so in an endurance race than maybe just there are plenty moving parts, but it's a lot of it comes down to physiology and psychology of you personally. So if you've got a standard of, oh, well, I beat XYZ last year, I should be able to beat them this year, and then they all beat you this year. That's another expectation, I suppose, isn't it? But you're comparing yourself to these other people. So yeah, just an interesting comparison of I guess, team sports versus endurance sports.
Yeah, there's something in here for coaches, isn't there, about culture, I think, because the danger of a team sport is that not only are there those standards imposed by me, but there's the standards that either are imposed by my teammates and the culture, but and also the standards I perceive are being, kind of that exist amongst the team and the culture. And so I think for coaches, it's really important, particularly in any team sport, but also I'm thinking clubs and training groups, that we're very, that we lean into trying to create a supportive culture amongst the groups of athletes that we work with, so that that idea of judgment because of certain standards, it isn't a negative thing, and that instead standards are reframed as, the things that we try and hold ourselves to. But there's also that, famous Clive Woodward no blame policy, like there was in the England rugby team, 20 years ago or whatever, where we are allowed to fail. We have the standards, but we're allowed to fail, and there's support within that. I'm interested actually to throw this back to you, because I've never been that involved in team sports, but you have played ice hockey in the past, and so been in that team environment. You've also spent a lot of years as a individual in individual sports and 70.3 racing and triathlons. So what's your take on the difference between team sport and solo sport when it comes to that standards piece?
It's a really different feel, as you would expect. So even I guess the three categories you've got, or maybe four categories across the scale that we're talking about, are individual training by themselves, individual training in a club, individual training in a squad, and then you've got team sports, at the end, in terms of least to most time spent with teammates and coaches.
Yeah.
and I think it probably scales quite well in terms of that camaraderie, but there's a huge jump between even squad and team sports, because at the end of the day, everything you do training wise and racing wise still comes down to how you perform on that day, what you are doing personally. Whereas I said with team sports, there's so many other, so ice hockey, five players outfield, one goalie, football, 11 aside, there's so many other players on your team even that could make little mistakes, half a meter wrong pass here, half an inch there.
Yeah.
And it completely changes the outcome of the game. Whereas I said, with endurance sports, as I said, there are other moving parts, but a lot of it comes down to that physiology and psychology. Psychology, do you want to do this? Physiology, can you do this? So yeah, it's an interesting, maybe that's another topic, is how lessons from team sports, because they're in terms of professional sport and the big money sports, like football, and that are some of the biggest ones there. So
yeah,
it would be interesting to dive into coaching philosophy and stuff a bit more.
It would. It feels like in terms of standards not being met. So in terms of standards not being met, that feels like self-compassion is going to be more relevant to that thing within team sports. Whereas, so someone in team sport might need self-compassion because of a failure to meet standards more
Mhm.
than solo sport athletes. Whereas a solo sport athlete, an individual sport athlete, might need self-compassion a little bit more when it comes to the whole expectations piece and not achieving
Mhm.
what they want. And somehow there's like a subtle difference there, I think. It also feels like team sport athletes might need self-compassion on a more micro level day to day, whereas individual sport athletes might need it more specifically around the kind of the big competitions where they're just trying to peak 2, 3, 4 times a year rather than every week or constantly in training.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, and I think it comes down to where the sport-specific daily stress is coming from. So specifically with this paper, some of the examples are more likely to happen in team sports, as you said,
Mm-hmm.
because it's that daily. Oh, I made a mistake in training. You know,
Yeah.
in endurance sports, you can obviously make mistakes, do the wrong set, or but a lot of it's not performing
Mm-hmm.
to your own personal level. Um, the only thing as well is I think it's from a self-compassion point of view, I feel like maybe in a team sport environment, you've got that camaraderie around you, so you maybe get over mistakes quicker, or you see your
Yeah.
teammates also performing poorly, or the coach shouting at everyone rather than just you.
Uh-huh.
So it's a sort of we're all in this together. Whereas if
Okay.
something does happen when you're in an individual sport, it's kind of all on your shoulders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Or at least, yeah, perceived as such.
yeah, definitely.
Excuse me interrupting the conversation for just 20 seconds. If you're new to the platform, there are 3 things you can do. When you finish listening to the podcast, take our 6 keys to unlocking your potential course. It's completely free. Then please sign up to the Team Elevate community. It's a great place to meet like-minded athletes who are on a learning journey just like you. And thirdly, if you liked what you found, you can sign up to our monthly membership plan, which gives you access to all of our resources, both now and in the future. So we hope to see you there soon.
I'm going to jump us back a second to evaluation. So this is something you mentioned when we were talking about this before. They say in the paper, given the constant evaluation competitive athletes experience in their lives, and then ... So it goes on to talk a bit more. But I think I just wanted to dive into the evaluation aspect,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe where you think that evaluation comes from. Is it maybe because we're very data driven? Are we constantly evaluating ourselves based on, oh, that kilometer I only did 6:30 per kilometer when I should have been doing 6:25 or 6:15?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you think it comes down to I mean, maybe is data just an aspect of it?
Yeah, it could be. The thing that jumped out at me when you were just introducing that question was the idea of the constant evaluation coming from a place of should. I did that, but I should have done something else. And
Mm-hmm.
anyone in counseling, anyone in therapy, anyone in any kind of mentoring will understand should is a big red flag. We need to be careful of shoulds and coulds. And I think that there is that constant evaluation in us as sports people and in coaches, because that's the reason that we're attracted to sport. It's about growth, it's about personal development. But one of the things that I think that we all need to understand as athletes, and that coaches need to understand about their athletes, is where does that mindset come from? And are we, in a sense, trying to run away from something, or are we trying to run towards something? And I think that often people who are trying to run away from something, they're in sport to maybe try and prove something, but particularly prove something to other people or themselves, can come at that reflection from a negative point of view. I should have done this. I should have done the
Yeah.
other. I am a bad person for not achieving that. That's the volume of that language I've turned up sort of on purpose. But I think the point is it comes from a negative point of view. Someone who is running towards something. So I'm interested to see how far I can go. I'm very intrinsically motivated. I'm curious about how I can improve my form. This whole thing is sort of this sort of joyous, life-fulfilling experiment of sort of self-fulfillment. I think then the reflection comes from a more positive point of view. So it is curious, it is interested. Okay, what did I do there? That rep didn't quite work out. Why did it not work out? And so there's far less judgment, and therefore there's maybe less need for self-compassion, or self-compassion has already happened. I'm already all right with who I am, and I'm already all right with failure, and I've done that work. So therefore, I can kind of experience my sport and reflect on my sporting performance from a positive point of view. So to boil all of that down, I think it's important we understand why we're motivated to drive ourselves in our sporting context and where that comes from. And that will probably tell us a lot about how much we need the self-compassion component in our sporting lives.
Yeah, and I think one of the aspects of self-compassion that struck me there is the mindfulness. It's that sort of experiencing the emotions, but almost taking your ego out of the equation. So it's not about, oh, I'm a bad person because I didn't do this. It's that didn't go as well. What can I do about it? It's as I say, experiencing it, but not berating yourself for it. So
yeah, exactly. But one of the key components of any self-compassion is that we have to create space for it. And this isn't just a natural, it shouldn't immediately at least be a very natural thing. It's something we have to go, right, I am going to take a few moments whenever I need to. That might be before, during, after a session, or just generally in life, to go, okay, something doesn't feel quite right. What is going on in me? How does that feel? What are the thoughts that are driving the feelings, or vice versa, so that we can actually understand, like you say, be mindful and actually take a pause and go, what's going on in me? Why is that there? And what do I need to do about it? Too often, again, especially as athletes, we're very good at, we're busy, first of all, and we're very good at switching off those emotions. So particularly people in endurance sports, their absolute superpower is switching off pain and disengaging to get a job done. And that's really, really useful when you're in an Ironman or a marathon or even a 5K. But it's less useful when it comes to understanding our emotions and what we need to do, some of the work that we need to do to maybe make life feel easier, less pressured, or just to reduce stress, anxiety, and worry.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mentioned earlier on that the paper was looking at shame and guilt. So the self-conscious emotions that they're talking about are shame and guilt. And I just thought this is an interesting bit. So I pulled this out. If an athlete attributes poor performance to their own ability and skills in general, this is more likely to lead to shame, whereas an athlete who attributes poor performance to a lack of effort is more likely to feel guilt. So as I say, I think I like that quote or that definition. So I thought it'd be good to share, and maybe even just for clarity around what people are feeling and why. Maybe people just feel bad and don't know necessarily what it is they're feeling bad about. So, for example, it's okay that you slow down in that last kilometer of the race, and it's okay to feel guilty about it. But for me, it's knowing when to let that guilt or shame go. Do you want to sort of build on that?
Yeah, certainly. I think these two emotions are two sides of the same coin. And this is where what we just spoke about, the kind of pausing, taking time to really try and identify what's going on, is really key. Because if we don't do that, we are incredibly likely to either ignore both or confuse one for the other. And the likelihood is here that research suggests that shame and guilt, whilst two sides of the same coin, are quite different. Guilt is potentially quite a positive emotion, and it can drive us to a healthy reflection and change, where we've kind of, okay, I did that thing that I maybe could have done better, so what will I do next time? It's a good platform for learning. Whereas shame tends to be a bit of a it tends to send us in a direction of wanting to hide. So shame tends to feel, and this is an important thing, is that we try and understand not just the thoughts, but the feelings. Shame tends to feel like a sinking, heavy, labored feeling where often you might just want to squirrel up and run and hide, like just be away from everything. That's how shame feels. Guilt feels a little bit more like, okay, okay, I did that wrong. So it's a little bit more tense. You kind of maybe hold it a bit more up in here and in the chest, but you maybe go, okay, I've acknowledged there's something I can do wrong now. What am I going to do about it? So the important point there is that we need to identify which. We need to understand that guilt can be quite positive, but shame potentially needs to be. Brene Brown talks about shame and says that the shame can't stand being spoken. So if
Yeah.
we feel that sense of, it might also come alongside embarrassment,
Mm-hmm.
journaling that can be really useful, or speaking to someone about it can be really useful, because if we put it out there, it no longer has a foothold in our mind, soul, or body.
And I think that actually that if based on that quote, if it is related to skills and abilities, that could tie in really nicely with your goal setting. So if you're sitting down with someone or doing it yourself to set your goals, you're taking a real good look at your skills and abilities and saying, where am I? Where do I want to be? And maybe that just helps be a bit more realistic about when it comes to a race, you're not hopefully not going to feel that shame because you've set that realistic goal. Sorry, and I think I'll just give a quick, probably very relevant example for endurance athletes. Typically because we always tend to swim in the morning at ridiculous times.
Yeah.
So you sleep in, you snooze your alarm for too long, and you no longer have time to work out that day. I'd say obviously it's fairly normal to feel guilty about that later in the day. What do you think? If you've got some advice, how can people stop it from kind of ruining their day? How do they give it up, or maybe use it as motivation to make sure they get up the next day?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that this is where it sort of starts to meet resilience. So people that get bogged down in either guilt or shame, no matter how we look at it, are people that are going to get stopped, because those two things are going to stop us from moving forward. So again, sports people tend to be very good at a reframe, or at least ones that have a very long, successful time in sport. So reframing, resilience, same thing. So take that example, which I really love because it's just really honest and practical and has happened to all of us. And we go, okay, what's the positive reframe of this? Well, do you know what? If my compulsion to sleep was so strong that I snoozed the alarm, I'm probably quite tired. So actually, instead of training, maybe I slept, and that was my body's way of saying you need sleep more than training. So actually now I'm more rested. I'm good to go. The next session will be better as a result. So that is probably one of the things. And the other thing is, again, just a sort of self-forgiveness, I suppose. And just saying like this is okay. If your partner, your child, whoever you love most in the world, if it happened to them and they were feeling really bad about it, what would you say to them? And say that to you. So find the positive in it and be kind to yourself about it.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think the what would you say to your partner or whoever is a bit of a flashback to maybe that other self-compassion episode we did, because I remember that one of the tasks they did in that was to write a huge problem, and then to write what they would say to their friend or whoever it was if they were having that problem, and then compare to how they would say that to themselves. And obviously the way they say it to themselves is a lot more sort of diminishing, whereas they were a lot more supportive to the other person.
Yeah, absolutely. In the race blueprint course that's on the Elevate platform, I talk about constructing the first 15 minutes of the day, and that jumps into my mind now because it links to this conversation, in that the first thing I do in that first 15 minutes of the day is feel what's going on in my body. Like, how do I feel today? So actually this morning I sat down, I felt a little bit anxious. I've got a really busy day. I feel a little bit underprepared for it. So, okay, acknowledge that. And then I do a couple of other things, but ultimately at the end of that time, I will always write down something. And often that is a little bit of a note to myself, or it's an intention. Today I will do this as a result of how I feel. So I acknowledge where I am, and then make a bit of a goal and plot a route forward that's going to set my day in a more positive direction. Doesn't mean that the day's going to be sunshine and rainbows. It's not a cure for all, and it always feels quite clunky, but it definitely has made a massive difference to how I approach training and and life every day, and has been a really positive thing for me.
And maybe something that gets easier as you go as well. You say it feels clunky, but maybe it's a habit thing. And again, maybe habits are a good thing to chat about in the future.
Oh, definitely. And I would say on that yes, it's clunky, but it's also a habit. And I know I feel less well off without it, because or else I arrive at life running too fast already. Whereas if I can enter the day from a place of rest and a place of reflection and a place of, often self-compassionate, notes. And I mean, like, 1 or 2 lines sometimes. This isn't a massive process. This is a few minutes. It's transformative to the rest of the day. And I think, again, this would be really useful for people in sport, because that's a high pressure environment where emotions can be the volume of emotions can be quite turned up.
Yeah. I wonder if on Training Peaks and Garmin, etc. If you record your sessions and you upload them, there's often a place to add a comment. So maybe that's a mini training diary, and they're usually private comments as well, or you can add private comments. So it might just be a way of doing that, just specific to that training session.
Exactly. You just find a system that works for you. I think it's as simple as that.
Nice. Okay, just to start to round up there, I'm just going to run through some of the headlines from the study, and then we'll have a final takeaway from Joel. Probably unsurprisingly, the higher the sport-specific daily stress, the lower the motivation, and the more negative self-conscious emotions. Self-compassion helped to protect athletes from feeling shame after sport-specific daily stress. Self-compassion wasn't related to motivation to train. So this finding indicates that athletes' concern that self-compassion is bad for training motivation is not justified. So just to clarify that one, people sometimes maybe think that self-compassion is bad for the motivation, but this shows that it's not. So with all that in mind, maybe as a final takeaway for everyone, how do you think people can become more self-compassionate?
Well, I would first just jump onto the last point, and I would say that while self-compassion doesn't have a negative impact on motivation, the research does suggest that they are separate, and that's why it doesn't have a negative impact. So we also need to think about our motivation as well. So self-compassion kind of keeps us positive, and then motivation maybe jumps that positivity and that focus up even more. So that's why kind of both of these elements are covered again in the Racing Blueprint course that can be accessed on the platform. Scott asked me that question again because I've forgotten what it was.
Okay, just as a final takeaway for everyone, how do you think that people can become more self-compassionate?
Okay, becoming more self-compassionate. We talked about it having sort of 3 main emotions. So first one is self-kindness, and that's that journaling piece. It's the speaking to yourself like you were the person that you love most in the world. The second one is the mindfulness bit that we spoke about. So it's creating space to acknowledge and feel emotions and get a handle on what's going on in a very non-judgmental way. Your emotions are yours. That's absolutely fine. We just need to understand them. And then the third bit is the kind of connectedness and shared humanity bit. So understanding that all of this stuff is part of the human condition, and talking to teammates and clubmates and other sports people about this stuff, sharing your experience. You'll only find that other people nod and agree and go, oh yeah, me too, which can be great. And that can sometimes, lead into really helpful conversations. Other things, as I say, letters, writing to yourself, journaling, all tend to be very, very, very good ways of getting this stuff out and understanding it. Often, these feelings of particularly guilt, I spoke about how they feel in the body. Guilt can feel like quite amped up, and that can feel like almost fight or flighty. If we're in that kind of state, what we need to do is slow down. And a good way to slow down is the out breath. So breathing exercises can be really good, and they fit really well into mindfulness, meditation, and prayer as well. So any of those mechanisms, whichever suit you, combined with conscious breathing, can be really good ways to feel what's going on, process it, slow the rate of the body down so that we're back into kind of almost our true state, and then we can rebuild and move forward again. Anything that you would add to that, Scott?
No, I think you've covered it all there, and just maybe as a recap, the kind of goal setting was an important aspect of helping you to almost not feel those self-conscious emotions. So it's maybe an important point to kind of, as well as the self-compassion, or improving the self-compassion.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the crossover into that motivation piece. So we can reset through self-compassion, and then we can kind of relaunch ourselves through good goal setting, focusing on our why and focusing on our motivation. So that's kind of a little process that people can go through when these guilt, shame, negative emotions come knocking, as they will do for everyone at one point or another.
Yeah. Nice. Okay, well, that's us for today. So thank you very much, Joel. Much appreciated. And we'll be back again next week with another episode.
Brilliant. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening. We hope you found that podcast really useful. And if you did, then it's just a sample of the information that's available across the Elevate platform. Where we want to drive you towards is the Team Elevate community pages. If you're enrolled on any one of the courses across the Elevate platform, you can sign up. And if you do, then it's the place where individuals like you can come together to grow, share ideas, ask questions, interact with us, and be the first to hear about upcoming courses and exclusive offers. So if you haven't signed up, sign up to Team Elevate now, and we hope to see you there soon.